the next NBA superstar to hit the open market and the potential missing piece for this Sixers team may have been revealed. In this video, I want to break down why there may be more fire than just smoke to Paul George's connection to the Sixers, how Daryl Morey set the table and prepared the team to get in the mix, the financials of what it would involve, and overall the likelihood of this actually going down. So I want to kick things off by jumping in by the initial report, which came from John Hollinger of The Athletic, and he writes in his piece, quote, "Keep an eye on Paul George, by the way. Presumably, if there was a max extension sitting around for him, he would have signed it by now. I think it's fair to say a couple of cap room teams in the East are monitoring this." And that is exactly where Daryl Morey and the Philadelphia 76ers come in, that they are one of the teams with the most cap space in the NBA. Daryl Morey has made his focus to put the Sixers in the unique space by having an MVP caliber player in Joel Embiid, a rising star in Tyrese Maxey, and then the second most cap space in the entire NBA beyond that. That for these exact type of situations in which a star comes available, those are when he wants to pounce. And we got a little more clarity on the Sixers specifically being tied to Paul George from Mark Stein here. And Stein writes, quote, "League sources say that Philadelphia continues to loom as an eager Paul George suitor should he make it onto the open market. The Sixers are said to maintain interest in George despite the widely held presumption that he and Leonard want to keep playing together. The Sixers are projected to have a considerable cap space this summer to pursue another star-level target before the max contract extension that they're expected to award all-star guard Tyrese Maxey." And I want to start with, I absolutely love that last line, that they do plan on rewarding Tyrese Maxey with the max contract. It is time to deliver this kid the blank check that he has earned, and that is when expectations truly become on Tyrese Maxey. And the other point to keep in mind here, this final line once again, is it says, "The Sixers are projected to have considerable cap space this summer to pursue another star-level target before the max contract extension that they're expected to award all-star guard Tyrese Maxey with." So that meaning that they do want to do some cap maneuvering here, that you can always go higher above the cap to re-sign your own players versus pursue others. So what this is saying is that they want to lock up a star like Paul George on a long-term big contract before giving Tyrese Maxey the full extension to maximize their potential spending. That is all great news. That is all great sign. And I do want to talk a little bit more in depth about Paul George specifically. So we know that there was a little bit of noise from Paul George to the Sixers back during the initial James Harden trade, that there was more so hopes than any legitimate reporting of there being a potential swap where it would be Harden from Paul George. There has been a great deal of frustration in Los Angeles about the lack of availability of both Kawhi and Paul George, more so on the Kawhi end of things, but Paul George absolutely guilty as well. And ultimately, it led to their driving force for wanting to bring James Harden in. That while James Harden is far from a perfect basketball player and absolutely has his flaws, he is one of the more durable. That he is a guy that shows up on a night-to-night basis, is capable of keeping a team afloat, and really the regular season innings eater that the Clippers team did need. Now, the Clippers have had an interesting trajectory this year. That when James Harden first got there, it looked ugly, that things didn't fit together. Then about midway through the season, they did find their stride, that they looked like a dangerous team that can win it in a variety of ways. They are still a team that concerns me in the playoff from the Western Conference standings. I am not ruling them out from making a deep run, and that absolutely could play a factor in how all these pieces fit together and what Paul George's desire is from here. But the bottom line is there's a lot of questions to that. But recently, the Clippers have not looked like quite the same team, that they have slowed down some momentum. They have hit some hiccups in the road and struggled to play together. And I have a little bit more on the financial side of things. Shout out to Brian Toperick for breaking all this down. So I do want to jump in on the Clippers situation here. And he writes, in mid-January, the Los Angeles Clippers signed Kawhi Leonard to a 3-year below-max extension that seemed to send a clear signal to both Paul George and James Harden about his willingness to sacrifice. That message has yet to be reciprocated. At the time, it seemed as though George would sign a similar extension soon after Leonard, and Harden would officially rejoin the two as a free agent in July. But more than halfway through March, George has yet to sign a new deal, and he recently voiced his frustration about his team amidst a 1-4 skid. Quote, "We want to be a team that's consistent and we want to establish an identity," George told reporters Sunday. "I've always spoken about having an identity, and I think it's extremely important. Right now, I don't think we have an identity." That's not exactly what you want to hear right now from George if you're the Clippers, especially only 1 month away from the playoffs. So a lot to break down there. For starters, with the situation here, I do think it is noteworthy that Kawhi Leonard taking below the max, that I think that's him saying, I want to keep this squad together, that I'm committed to winning with these guys. And I am surprised that Paul George has not been signed to a contract yet. And it also leads me to believe that the more time goes on, the less likely that becomes. And with James Harden, to throw him in the equation here, he's been crystal clear since the time that he was in Philadelphia about he does have the desire to sign another significant long-term contract. That was one of the driving forces and reasons why he opted into this deal with the Sixers, is that he was going to have to sign a lesser contract, lesser value, have to take a pay cut if he were to not accept that player option. He ultimately did, and things worked out. He was shipped to LA. But that made sense from James Harden's mindset for setting him up for this massive extension, this last long-term huge deal for him in his career. And Paul George is in a bit of a similar boat, that you can never tell what's truly going on between these guys' minds and what is their priorities. Is it about winning? Is it about money? Is it about location? That personally, I've thought it's been unlikely that Paul George would leave LA because he is a West Coast guy. He is from that area. I expected him to want to retire there, but there could be a burning passion inside of him to just simply get paid, that maybe there is a desire. And for these guys, a lot of times it is about more than just money. That yes, the money's great, and all these guys are doing phenomenal in terms of money, but there's something a bit of a pride attached to it, that if you're the highest paid player or if you're being paid more than other guys, there's a little bit of that pride factor that comes with it. And Kawhi is obviously putting his money where his mouth is by taking an extension below the max. But I don't know if Paul George has quite that same buy-in, that there is a bit of a value that is attached to guys. And when you go below the max, it's tough to get back there in NBA standards. That isn't how it tends to work. You don't go max contract, then below max, then back to the max. It tends to be you're either in or you're out. And I think Paul George, there's a world where he does not want to accept that sacrifice just yet. And if that is the case, the Sixers are the best spot for both him and for the team. That from a basketball perspective, you can throw Paul George in just about any roster. That to pull up his stats in his career, overall averaging 20.8 points per game, 3.7 assists, 6.3 rebounds, 1.7 steals, a career 38.3% three-point shooter on 6.8 attempts per game, shooting 40% from beyond the arc this year on 8.2 attempts per game, still averaging 22.3 points per game. He's been an all-star almost year in and year out in his career, once led the league in steals at 2.2 per game. And he is a guy that we oftentimes forget how good he truly was. Before the leg injury, that graphic, disgusting leg injury that occurred with Team USA, when he was with the Pacers during his first bout, that was a guy that was going head-to-head with LeBron James. And no, I'm not saying that version of Paul George returns, but that is still worth noting that that is the peak of his play. And even at this point in his career, he's a guy that's going to see his game age pretty well, that he's always going to be a really solid shooter, a guy that has the 6'9" frame that can D up on some of the wings of the NBA, a guy that gives these Sixers a better chance against players like Jason Tatum, like Jaylen Brown, than they've had on roster and currently have on roster. He is a seamless fit in that regard. And if the direction is for Paul George to come to Philadelphia, money is absolutely the sell. That you are going to back up the brink truck, empty the pockets, and get the job done. But there is good reason to be optimistic about that. And to dive into that here, not only can the Sixers create enough cap space to sign George in free agency, but they could have around $15 million left over as well. Granted, that would require them not to win a first-round playoff series, thus making Paul Reed's contract non-guaranteed, waive Reed, trade their first-round pick, and renounce the rights to all their free agents, including Buddy Hield, D'Anthony Melton, and Nicholas Batum. As noted recently, the cap space plan isn't a binary choice. Even if the Sixers are interested in signing George or another max free agent, they still should have some flexibility beyond just minimum contracts to round out their supporting cast. So obviously, there is a ton of moving parts here that it isn't as simple, the NBA cap never is, as can you afford this guy or can't you? That there's always moving parts, there's always other factors to keep in mind. And with the Sixers specifically, that they've been all about preserving that flexibility. That to take a look at their cap space as a whole, obviously Joel Embiid still under contract, the centerpiece, the future MVP. We have the little restricted free agent mark next to Tyrese Maxey's name, who is expected to get that massive contract that he is deservingly earned. And that's just about it. That Paul Reed having that stipulation that if they do not make it past the first round, which I fully expect the Sixers team to do, that his contract would become non-guaranteed once again. But I'm still content with an $8 million number attached to Paul Reed's name. And then everyone else is expiring contracts. Tobias Harris, Buddy Hield, D'Anthony Melton, Nico Batum, Robert Covington, Kelly Oubre, Kyle Lowry. The list goes on and on with that. And what that means is that there is the ultimate flexibility for what this Sixers team wants to do. In some views, this year is a tryout year for the Sixers team of who actually wants to be a part of this championship contending roster. And Paul George would absolutely raise the ceiling of this team to elevate them into that conversation. And I do believe guys will be back. It better not be Tobias Harris, but there will be guys that will be back. Guys like DeAnthony Melton, which if he's healthy is an incredibly useful player. Nico Batum, I would love to have for another year as a complementary piece. Buddy Hield, I cannot wait to see what he looks like next to Joel Embiid, and I do believe there's value in keeping him around for the long run. There are players on the Sixers team worth holding on to, and especially they become more valuable when they have a minimized role, when they are playing off guys like Paul George. So for now, we will see how the things shape out for the Sixers. Still a lot to be decided in this season. I would say how the Clippers season wraps up will likely be a driving force in what the conclusion to a lot of this conversation is. But the bottom line is Daryl Morey has put the Sixers in a position to benefit whenever that next star comes available. That they have the best resources, the most available cap space, and will be ready to pounce when the opportunity is right. If Paul George is that guy, I'm ready for it. That I do think that is a perfect mix, a perfect trio of Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid is about as complimentary as you can find. So I'm all about it if that is the case. We will ultimately see if that it plays out. I'm sure there will be plenty more updates regarding this conversation as the season begins to wind down. I'm currently recording this before the Sixers and Clippers games tonight, so we'll see if I drop it before or after. But either way, you'll get a close-up view of Paul George and what he brings to this team. There's also another matchup against the Clippers on Sunday, so getting to see plenty of these guys matching up. And who knows, maybe this could be the homecoming for Paul George. The Philadelphia homecoming, leaving LA, I would be all about it. But let me know what you guys think. Are you as excited as I am? Do you think Paul George is the missing piece? Do you have any concern with his age, his injuries, or anything else, which I do understand there is some relevancy too. But I do want to hear from you guys in the comments. Make sure you're hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.